We have a detailed program of cooperation with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service and public safety to ensure that we're abreast of any changes in the security landscape. And we have enhanced our training and protocols for our staff so that they're aware and are able to flag any incidents that might be of concern for further investigation.
You're just about out of time. Okay. All right. Thank you. Dr. Ellis, you have 5 minutes now.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks everyone for being here. To you, Ms. Jeffrey, you talked about security clearances being reviewed on a regular basis. Can you talk about what the current policy is?
The current security screening process for security clearances at the secret level requires review every 10 years unless incidents arise that require a review for cause of that clearance, as was the case in this situation.
Thank you very much. And through you, Chair, can you tell us before this incident, when were these security clearances for, just for Dr. Chu, when was it last reviewed before this incident?
I'm sorry, I don't have that information at hand.
Could you please provide that to the committee, please?
Yes.
Thank you for that. Are there any health scientists of any nationality currently working for the Government of Canada who have participated in one of the over 200 PRC talent recruitment programs?
I'm not able to comment on that. I can comment about the processes at the Public Health Agency, where we require conflict of interest and affiliation declarations from all of our scientists, indeed from all of our personnel. And I can say that participation in talent programs of foreign countries, if declared, would be a significant conflict of interest and would not be accepted.
Thank you for that. And through you, Chair, can you tell the committee, to the best of your knowledge, are there any employees working at labs in Canada now who are members of talent programs?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm unable to comment on labs across the country. I can only comment on the declared affiliations and conflicts of interest of the staff at the Public Health Agency, as I previously mentioned.
Yes, so how many scientists would fall into that?
Monsieur le Président.
Point of order.
Yes, Mr. Villemur.
Comme indiqué plus
As previously said, as I mentioned earlier, Ms. Jeffrey is trailing off. Her voice is trailing off, and I can't hear the end of her questions, of her answers, rather.
Okay, I'll give some floor cues. Okay, all right. Do you need the preceding answer to be repeated, Mr. Villemur?
Oui, s'il vous plaît.
Yes, please.
Okay, I've stopped the clock, so if you can repeat that, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I can say is, first of all, I'm the deputy head of the Public Health Agency of Canada. I'm not in a position to comment on the participation of scientists across the country. I can comment on the work of the personnel that belong to the Public Health Agency. I can say that they're required to submit declarations of affiliations for research and also conflict of interest. If they were, those types of talent programs would be required to be declared. If they were declared, they would constitute a conflict of interest and would not be allowed, given the nature of their work. And in the case that's at issue today, scientists hid and, in fact, lied about those affiliations. And when they were discovered, those scientists were terminated because of that.
Thank you very much. Just to be
Doctor.
clear, Chair, I would suggest I have 3 minutes left. Am I clear with that?
Yep.
Thank you very much. Dr. Lucas, what we heard from Ms. Jeffrey just now is that there be no scientists known to be participating in any talent programs that the Government of Canada would be aware of. Is that your indication as well, sir?
Mr. Chair, similar to the response of Madame Jeffrey, I can speak to Health Canada and the regulatory scientists in Health Canada who perform product reviews in the context of the Food and Drug Act and other statutes are subject to the same requirements in terms of declarations of conflict of interest and affiliations. And on the basis of those, to our knowledge, there are no affiliations or conflicts of concern, including talent programs.
Thank you
And
very much. No, thank you for that, Dr. Lucas. Through you, Chair, I'll ask the same question to Ms. Hudgens. Are you aware of any scientists with declared affiliations with talent programs who are currently working for the Government of Canada?
Thank you for the question. The answer to that question is similar to that of Ms. Jeffrey and Dr. Lucas. I have no knowledge of that and am unable to make that blanket assertion.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to Ms. Jeffrey, we now know that the Dr. Chu's computer was mirrored in about February of 2019. Yet in spite of all that, shipments of Ebola and Henipavirus were allowed to continue on March 31st, 2019. Do you think that's appropriate?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I mentioned, there was extensive international collaboration in responding to the Ebola outbreak that took place in West Africa from 2014 to 2016. The work that the National Microbiology Lab and indeed the life's work of Dr. Chu was in therapeutics to respond to Ebola. The collaboration that was taking place was authorized and was fully approved through the procedures that were in place.
Thanks, Ms. Jeffrey. Through you, Chair, if I might interrupt you, I apologize for that, but I didn't ask you if they were approved. I asked you, do you think it's appropriate given what you now know?
I think that international collaboration on therapeutics for pathogens and toxins continues to be very important to the development of the science. I would say that obviously in hindsight, given the activities of these scientists, which emerged much later in that timeline, and evidence of those activities, we would obviously look at decisions that were taken around their work sooner. But the work of collaboration on Ebola continued to be an international priority. And indeed, many countries, Canada included, the United States, but also including China, were active in Western Africa, responding on the ground to the Ebola outbreak. And it was in that vein that the collaboration was approved and the work authorized.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis. We'll now go to Mr. Erskine Smith for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. On the one hand, we had the director of CSIS at this committee earlier, and he said, in his view, that PHAC acted expeditiously. That's a good thing. I do want to pick up, though, on my colleague's questioning just now. So I understand the rationale for the shipment of Ebola to the Wuhan Institute of Virology at the end of March in 2019. It's my understanding when I looked through the email chains, it was Dr. Chu that instigated that transfer, yes?
I will turn to my colleague, Dr. Pelican, to talk about the rationale for that transfer. It was related to Dr. Chu's work, but over to you, Dr. Pelican.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Indeed, Dr. Chu has been a longstanding, at that point, and internationally recognized scientist who had led the development of the Ebola monoclonal antibodies, which were trialed.
I understand it, but she was the instigator of the transfer. Yes or no?
Dr. Chu was the primary interlocutor with WIV.
Okay, and yet at the same time, I mean, a week earlier, and Presidia didn't get nearly the facts that CSIS was able to uncover. But, they were contracted December 2018, and there's a preliminary report. They've got investigative findings. In their investigative findings, they say, and related to the patent, the undisclosed patent by Dr. Chu, they say it's highly improbable that she did not know. They go on to note there's a collaboration with a number of individuals, including at the Chinese Academy of Military Medical Sciences, for which there may not be a letter of support and further investigations required. At that point, there's an investigation underway specifically related to Dr. Chu. How is it that PHAC officials, I've seen the email chains, there are other PHAC officials that are obviously doing the approvals here, no red flags? I'll stay with Mr. Poliquin. You seem to know more. Like, no red flags here? Why no red flags? How could there possibly not be red flags?
So as Ms. Jeffrey had highlighted, the China had been very active in the 2014-2016 West Africa Ebola outbreak.
I don't mean about China. I mean about Dr. Chu. Dr. Chu's under investigation. There's a report related to Dr. Chu, March 23rd. She's the instigating force behind this transfer. How are there not red flags at that point?
So, Mr. Chair, the investigation was, as has been previously highlighted, these were allegations, and further investigation was ongoing.
Well, except that the report does say it's highly improbable that she did not know about the patent. So, further investigation is warranted, but they're already casting aspersions on the authenticity of her answers at that point. I don't know. Like, I'll be honest. Like, on the chain of events, a major overblown commentary from conservatives. We got CSIS director coming here saying no expeditious action, but I do look at the email chains here on approvals, and look, PHAC was aware of this too. I see an email from Alan Lau on April 3rd saying we didn't do anything wrong. ... Just that because of the nature of the pathogens and where it was going, they, the higher ups in PHAC, wanted to know if we did our due diligence. But it strikes me if full due diligence had been done, specifically in relation to Dr. Chu, that transfer does not occur at the end of March. Is that fair to say?
So the investigations were ongoing at that time, and the procedures were ongoing.
Okay. My last question in terms of time, Ms. Jeffrey, you'd said to my colleague, Mr. Fragaskatis, and I appreciate it, that there were no unauthorized removals. At the same time, there are many documented instances where restricted visitors had inappropriate access. You've got shipments regularly mislabeled. Given the evidence of lying from Dr. Chu and Dr. Chang, the evidence where they were completely untruthful on multiple occasions, matched with the evidence of mislabeling and inappropriate access for restricted visitors, what makes you so confident that there were no unauthorized removals? What do you base that on?
I base that statement on the very rigorous multi-key approach that we have to safeguarding pathogens and toxins, and I'll turn to Dr. Poliquin to talk about the audit process that ensures that we have an accurate accounting constantly of those materials.
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Chair. Under the HPTA regulations, inventory control for these pathogens is very complex and involves regular auditing of the materials that is done independently of any of the scientists and has been an ongoing process over the past 20 years. In following the regular audit procedures, but also in the wake of the incidents, audits were conducted, and we can confirm that all specimens that were expected to be there and logged are present and accounted for.
I appreciate that, and I know, Mr. Chair, I'm out of time, and I appreciate all the answers. I would just say it would be even better if you said we've done a lot of due diligence, we did the best we could, and CSIS is coming to your defense in a great, serious way. I think acknowledging that transfer at the end of March was a mistake would also be welcome. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Erskine-Smith. Now, we're going into a little bit into our second hour. Would the committee like to go to 6 minutes each and then go back to the 5, 5, 2.5, 2.5? Are you, or do you want to continue 5, 5, 2.5, 2? I'm thinking particularly of the block and the NDP to have a little bit of extra question time. Why not?
Je serais évidemment favorable à 6 minutes.
Of the committee, and we are
I would, of course, agree to 6 minutes.
so the committee. We should just continue with.
I'm sorry. The issue is that we're normally after an hour we flip we flip panels, and then we begin with the routine all over 6 minutes each side, then 5, 5, 2.5, 2.5. I'm just asking the committee if they want to revert to that pattern for this second hour.
I believe, Mr. Chair, since it is a whole single 2-hour panel, we should abide by the terms of the routine motion adopted at the beginning of this committee to continue as the routine motion specifies.
Any other comments on this? All right. Well, we will live then according to the routine motions, and we will go to Mr. Chong for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Jeffrey, you mentioned several times that international collaboration in research between level 4 labs in the area of human pathogens and viruses is important. So my question is asked in that context. The named research organizations list that Public Safety has put out, developed by Public Safety, does not include the Wuhan Institute of Virology. That list, though, does state that institutions that are not on the list may still pose a risk, and that different entities within the Government of Canada are to take that risk and assess it, even though institutions like the Wuhan Institute of Virology may not be on the list. And so my question is, the Minister of Health had, I think, previously said that there was collaboration going on between entities in the PRC and the National Microbiology Laboratory, and then later said that there wasn't any collaboration going on. So my simple question is, can you confirm that there is no ongoing collaboration, either in terms of transfers of information or materials, between the lab in Winnipeg and any entities in the People's Republic of China, including the Wuhan Institute of Virology?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I can confirm that there are no, since this collaboration that we've been speaking of today was ended, there is no collaboration with the government of China or institutes in China on issues related to the lab or any others. Minister Holland was referring to the fact that we continue to participate in UN and other multilateral bodies where it's possible that there could be representatives of the government of China present, but there is no bilateral cooperation or collaboration agreements now.
Okay,
Mr.
thank
Chong,
you.
I'm going to just stop the clock. Mr. Villemure lost connection, and we're just getting him back on, so
Sure.
we'll just suspend for a moment.
Thank you.
We are back. We're still trying to connect with Mr. Villemure. We'll do our best, but in the meantime, the business must proceed. Mr. Chong, you have 2 minutes, 42 seconds.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for the Deputy Minister of Health. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, we're trying to understand why it took 10 months for the lab to be secured. And so my question is, when did the Deputy Minister of Health first become aware of the issues in the Winnipeg lab? Was it in 2018 or 2019?
Mr. Chair, I assumed my role at Health Canada at the beginning of September 2019. I don't have specific information pertaining to my predecessor being informed, but I would assume he would have been informed at key junctures by the president of the Public Health Agency at that time.
Could you get back to the committee with that information? Because it's material.
Yes.
Thank you. Madam Jeffrey, you mentioned several times in your opening remarks and otherwise that you refer to processes that have been put in place that are broad-based, not related to any specific individuals, that your security posture and policies have been strengthened and adapted, and that specific personnel security measures have been updated. Could you tell us a little bit about what exactly those processes, those policies, those postures, those measures are?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. I'm happy to speak specifically about some of the policies. For obvious reasons, the details of operational physical security measures we won't speak to. But I would point to, for example, the review of all collaboration agreements by a science security committee in addition to the investigators and the lab management. I would point to enhanced compliance monitoring from our security branch, as well as via partnerships with our security and law enforcement agencies. I would point to the mandatory requirement for not just conflict of interest, but affiliation declarations, and the access control systems, the new student policies that require appropriate clearances and
Time
Have
has
any of these?
expired, Mr. Chong. Sorry.
Okay.
But there will be further opportunities. I think we have
Thank
quite a
you.
bit of time left. Ms. Lalonde, you now have 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, et j'aimerais remercier.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today.
Some concerns surrounding whether we have the appropriate security measures to set up a level 4 lab in Saskatchewan. Would you say that they are, that, based on our readiness, that we're ready to set up a level 4 lab in Canada? And what are the processes that would be in place prior to approving a level 4 lab?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. The Human Pathogens and Toxins Act has very stringent requirements for for work that happens with pathogens of different risk groups. There is a list of pathogens according to their safeguards and the requirements for them. The budget recently announced also has presented that new legislation is being brought forward to enhance the regulations further, given the post-pandemic requirements for Canada to have domestic laboratory and health and life sciences and biomanufacturing capabilities to provide health security for us against future health threats and future potential pandemics. The processes under the HCPA require licensing. They require clearances for all personnel. They require a graduated approach to be put in place that limit how and with what new facilities will be able to work. There's inspection and on-site monitoring that is required, and the clearance processes have also been enhanced. Any application for a potential new laboratory requiring that it would be subject to the HPTA, including level 3 and level 4 labs, would require stringent regulation, and licenses and approvals would not be granted for their operation without having detailed planning in place.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Jeffrey. Through you, Mr. Chair, again, I would like to know what are the processes in place to protect the national security when working with international collaboration in laboratory research? And maybe can you also give some example of why Canada's collaboration with other countries on scientific research is actually so crucial?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The work that we undertook at the Public Health Agency and through the National Microbiology Lab in the response to COVID-19 is an excellent example of the linkages that are required to combat a novel pathogen. I'd like to turn to Dr. Polican to give some of the concrete examples of how the work with our colleagues advanced those efforts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Indeed, international collaboration in this space is essential for advancement of the work. A concrete example pertinent here would be the development of the Ebola monoclonal antibody cocktail. Involved the development of multiple components of that treatment, which some of them came from American innovation and advancement. And it's by putting together those advances that the ultimate product was realized. by extension, our ability to collaborate internationally and bring together the best minds to tackle the problems at hand are an essential feature of that work. However, we are very cognizant and have become even more so of the shifting threat environment that we operate in. Hence why any new collaborations that are born out of the NML involve a security dimension and security review prior to us commencing the work.
Thank you very much. And if I have time, I would like to ask one more question. What is the purpose of the National Microbiology Laboratory sharing samples with other public health laboratories?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is essential to share samples between the level 4 labs, as these are what enable the science to be done. By having the specimens on hand, we are able to do diagnostic development, applied research, and medical countermeasure development. But a lot of that work is essentially rooted in having access to the samples to do the work.
Thank you, Ms. Lalonde. Now,
Thank you.
Mr. Villemur has rejoined us. We're sorry to have lost you there for a few moments. I just wanted to bring you up to speed on where we are. You will have the next 2.5 minutes, followed by Ms. Idlog for 2.5 minutes. We then have Mr. Cooper for 5 minutes and Mr. Erskine Smith for 5 minutes. And my calculation gives us time for another round of 5, 5, 2.5, and 2.5. So be thinking about who you would like from your team. It's pretty obvious from Bloc and the NDP, but Liberals and Conservatives just get your lineup ready for that last go round. Okay, so Mr. Villemur, 2.5 minutes, sir. You may be on mute, Mr. Villemur, but can you hear us?
Yeah, so he has to unplug and plug his.
I think the request is for you to unplug your headset and plug it back in again. Do that. I'll tell you what, we'll flip it. Ms. Idlog, are you ready for 2.5 minutes? Okay, we'll go to Ms. Idlog first and back to you, Mr. Villemur, in 2.5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. What other countries should the committee be aware of in terms of foreign interference in our research institutions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that's a question that is probably best posed to the Canadian Security Intelligence Service and our national security colleagues. At the Public Health Agency, we are alert to ensuring that all of our international collaborations are approved and vetted, and we have fully implemented the research policy on sensitive technology research, including the National Security Guidelines for Research Partnerships and with named research organizations. And so we are fully compliant with all of those procedures, but the realm of foreign interference is in the national security domain, not in public health.
Okay, thank you. In terms of potential future threats that are most concerning to PHAC, and what should we as parliamentarians be aware of in terms of your work on future preparedness?
As we saw during the COVID pandemic, there remain significant public health threats in a globalized world. We are currently undertaking work in research looking at H5N1, avian influenza, measles outbreaks, Mpox. We have daily threat assessment and response meetings assessing all of these threats. Our lab and the level 3 and level 4 facilities that we have are essential to look at some of the high consequence pathogens. I'll turn to Dr. Polican to outline some of the additional areas of his work.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Indeed, at this time, we are living in a period where we are seeing increasing activity of diseases, and part of the role of the National Microbiology Lab is to remain abreast of these. Mpox as a good example with a recent outbreak domestically, but an ongoing activity in the Democratic Republic of Congo, for example. It is through connections globally and with our international partners that we are able to keep abreast of what is happening in other countries. And that helps to inform our work in our preparedness, both in terms of diagnostics to be ready to detect new threats, but also medical countermeasures to help to combat them.
Thank you, Mr. Blout. We've lost Mr. Villemer again. If we do manage to get him back and fully functioning, I'd like to give him 5 minutes because he's missed 2 rounds, okay? Mr. Cooper, you do have 5 minutes now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madame Jeffrey, have any of the processes, posture, policies, or measures recently implemented triggered any review of security clearances in PHAC other than the standard review every 10 years?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think, as the committee is aware, there is an ongoing RCMP investigation, and I'd have to refer the committee to my colleagues at Public Safety and the RCMP in terms of their investigations and any work that's underway there.
That's Dr. Chu and Dr. Chang.
I'm not aware of the details of their investigations, so I will have to refer you to Public Safety.
Thank you. Are PRC citizens who are not Canadian citizens nor citizens of formerly allied countries allowed to be granted secret security clearances?
The policy on security clearances is set by the Treasury Board Secretariat, and it is irrespective of nationality.
Thank you for that. Paragraph 31 of the June 30th, 2020 CSIS assessment, and Dr. Chu states that an individual...
Mr. Villemer, you're back with us, are you?
Oui, monsieur.
All right.
Yes.
What we're going to do is we're going to give you 5 minutes because you've missed 2 of your 2.5-minute segments. We have Mr. Cooper now, we have Mr. Erskine Smith, and then we'll go to you for 5 minutes, okay?
Merci beaucoup, c'est très apprécié.
All right.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Michael's 3.5 minutes.
Ms. Jeffrey, through you, Mr. Chair, paragraph 31 of the June 30th, 2020 CSIS assessment and Dr. Chu states that an individual identified as restricted visitor number 1 had access to the Winnipeg lab. This individual was an employee of the People's Liberation Army-controlled Beijing Institute of Biotechnology, whose mentor was a major general identified as Beijing's chief biological defense expert engaged in research relating to biodefense and bioterrorism. Did this individual have a secret security clearance?
I'm going to refer to Dr. Polican about the processes for restricted visitors at the lab.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
It's yes or no.
In terms of access to the laboratory, restricted visitors were a special category of individuals that were under escort at all times, but would not have had access to high containment laboratories.
So who authorized this Beijing military scientist access to the lab?
I would say that the policy on visitors restricted their access to areas in line with the clearances that they had, and so there would have been no access of visitors to restricted level 3.
That's not my question. They had access to the lab. They were in the lab. They might not have been in the level 4 part of the lab, and I'm asking you, Ms. Jeffrey, or whoever may answer, who authorized that access to a Beijing military scientist whose mentor was Beijing's foremost expert in bioterrorism?
I'll first say that when we use the term National Microbiology Lab, we're referring to a complex of buildings that has both secure and public facilities. I'll turn to our Chief Security Officer to talk about the policy.
I want to know who authorized that individual.
We will return to the committee with that information. I don't have it at hand.
Paragraph 54 of the same CSIS assessment states that Dr. Chu gave access to the lab to at least 2 individuals who were employed with PRC institutions whose work is not aligned with Canadian interests. Did Dr. Chu on her own have the authority to grant access to those individuals? And if not, who did?
I'll refer to Dr. Pellicam for the procedures at the lab.
Yes, so prior to access to the laboratory, so at the time, an individual would have been able to fill out a facility access request form for a particular individual, and those are submitted to the security division for review to provide access. But as previously stated, access to the laboratory does not give full access to all parts of the laboratory. There are strict.
I understand that, and I thank you for that clarification. I presume that would also apply to the Beijing military scientist who was a restricted visitor. Would CSIS intelligence assessments or reviews been undertaken before those individuals would have been granted access to the lab?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll turn to our Chief Security Officer to talk about the procedures.
Thank you for the question. The individuals attending the lab would be attending as temporary visitors under the policy at the time, which required them to be escorted if they were in the lab. They were granted access because they were not going to be in any part of the lab that was secure or required a clearance.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Now, Mr. Erskine-Smith, you have 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I don't want to dwell on this, but I do want to ask one follow-up in relation to that transfer at the end of March in 2019. There's a big difference between marching someone out, escorting someone out via the RCMP, and curtailing one's authority while an investigation is ongoing. And when someone is under investigation with serious allegations that have potentially national security consequences, due process, of course, is justified. But in the interest of security, our national security, surely we should be looking at curtailing individual authority. And so when we look at lessons learned here to ensure this does not happen again, are you looking at the processes by which one might curtail someone's authority while an investigation is ongoing?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would say that our security processes and procedures have been enhanced across the board, and we have in place additional policies around security clearances, around access controls, around the types of visitors and students that are able to access the lab that are much more stringent than there were at the time, which would provide.
So knowing that, and apologies for cutting you off, but knowing that, if the policies that you've now put in place had been in place and these allegations have been made, there's an investigation ongoing, you have the initial preliminary report from Presidia, and then the transfer happens at the end of March, would the transfer have happened at the end of March, knowing what we knew as of the end of March with the current policies now in place?
I can say it's a hypothetical question, Mr. Chair, because the collaboration.
Well, it's not, because we have we have the evidence as of that date at March, and we have new policies. We apply current policies to a fact pattern that is existing. It's not hypothetical, it's an existing fact pattern. So would that transfer have occurred at the end of March 2019 if the current policies had been in place?
What I would say is under the current policies, there would have been 2 additional layers of review for that collaboration, which was in fact approved in November of 2018, although the shipment took place later. So the collaboration was approved much earlier in line with the policies at the time. The difference now is that it would be approved by 2 additional layers of review.
Okay, well, if the answer isn't no, it doesn't necessarily stop the transfer. You might want to still revisit those policies, because the answer is, of course, it should have stopped that transfer. Okay, the second avenue of questions I want to get to. So Presidia is contracted December 2018. They've got their first report March 2019. They've got a second report February 2020. They find effectively nothing of value in comparison to what CSIS finds out. CSIS has a preliminary assessment in April 2020, and mere matter of months later, June 2020, they blow the whole thing open, and that's why Dr. Chu is ultimately marched out of the lab. why why did CSIS not get involved earlier?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. CSIS was involved from the outset. Indeed, it was an awareness session with CSIS that led the security branch to begin investigations, working with the lab to see if we had vulnerabilities of the nature they described. And obviously, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service has tools and methods available to them under their act that affords them greater insight into covert and clandestine activities, and they've appeared before this committee previously. The Public Health Agency could only act on the information provided to us, and the investigation that the service conducted was disclosed to us on June 30th, 2020. We took action at that time. What I would say is
But
that
can I ask on that? Just the difference between the outcomes related to the Presidia analysis and investigation versus the CSIS analysis and investigation, again, knowing what we know today, do you think we ought to have gone, PHAC ought to have gone and had CSIS undertake assessments, more detailed assessments earlier in the process?
The Canadian Security Intelligence Service was involved and informed of the activities that were underway from the outset of the cases that are underway. So as disclosed in the documents, they were engaged and aware, and we were working together as of August and September 2018.
So then simple yes, no, and so you don't, do you see a material difference in the quality of investigation between Presidia and CSIS?
Yes, of course, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service has tools available to them under the Act that only they have. They were involved in the fact-finding and the investigation all the way along. It wasn't until the later stages of that investigation that they were able to obtain the information that informed that June 30th letter. For example, on their letter of April 9th, they had not yet found the information that was available to them later. That letter suggested that there still was no reason to suggest that the scientists had willingly cooperated and that they were vulnerable. Clearly, in the intervening time between April 9th and June 30th, their investigations and their tools uncovered information that radically changed that assessment, and we acted immediately on receiving that information. This was a case where people took steps to hide their activities, and the national security and law enforcement investigations were deploying all their tools throughout to try and uncover additional evidence, and eventually did so on June 30th.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Mr. Erskine-Smith. Now, just again to recap where we are, because he missed a couple of rounds, Mr. Villamur, you're getting the next 5 minutes. We'll then go to Dr. Ellis, Mr. Franciscatos, and then 2.5 minutes for Mr. Villamur and 2.5 minutes for Ms. Idlout, and I think that'll just about wrap up the session. So, Mr. Villamur, good to have you back with us. 5 minutes to you, sir.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for my colleagues for their understanding. Ms. Jeffrey, I'm listening to your answers, and it sounds like everything is going smoothly. There are policies in place, and then we added policies, and there was no problem. Policies usually protect people who are of goodwill, but we don't know what to do with those who are not of goodwill. I'd like you to be specific. Some people were held responsible. Were there any consequences on those who were directly responsible for these mistakes?
Individuals that hid their activities and undertook clandestine collaboration have been terminated, fired from the public service and the lab.
Excusez-moi.
Sorry to cut you off. I'm not talking about the two. I'm not talking about the scientists. I'm talking about the people at the agency. I'm talking about those who should have been paying attention when they weren't. Was there anybody other than the scientists who were responsible for this mess?
Say that it was actually the Public Health Agency that first raised issues about potential activity that was underway that launched the investigation. The Canadian Security Intelligence Service has already stated that we acted as expeditiously as we could, given the information that was available. We found allegations. We followed them up with an administrative investigation. We sought the evidence, working with our security and intelligence partners, and we fired the scientists involved. The processes and policies that we put in place are designed to have further layers of security and process that will allow us to detect efforts to disguise collaborations and affiliations and other motivations as quickly as possible in future.
Est-ce qu'il y avait de l'incompétence?
Ms. Jeffrey, was there any incompetence in the management of the agency at that point?
In this case, the leadership of the agency and of the lab took steps as quickly as they could to respond to the information. They detected and raised the allegations, and measures were put in place accordingly.
Est-ce qu'il y avait de l'incompétence à l'agent?
Was there any incompetence at the agency?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In this case, we are talking about scientists who, despite clearances and work that was widely recognized as leading science globally, hid their activities.
Sorry to cut you off. I'd like to be clear. I understand that they are high-level scientists who hid their activities, and you were protecting the Canadian population by implementing certain policies. When you caught wind of their activities, you reacted. But before realizing, there was a lot of time that went on. There are a lot of people that may have been committing actions that were not appropriate. I understand that once the red flag was raised, you acted. But before that, was there anybody who was incompetent? Are you taking for granted that some people were acting in good faith? I understand about the scientists, but we're coming into a labyrinth here. There's scientists and so on. I'm asking about the competence or incompetence of people.
I would say that, Mr. Chair, the policies that were put in place, for example, on students, in retrospect, afforded too much latitude to scientists that were obviously had a clandestine agenda of which we were not aware. And as a result, those policies have been changed. But the policies themselves were respected in those cases. And the policies that we put in place now are far more stringent, and our compliance mechanisms are strengthened and regularly revisited. So we have learned lessons from this and strengthened our policies accordingly.
Donc vous avez renforcé vos...
So you strengthened your policies following negligence that you observed. The minister at the beginning of April said that there was a list of people who we shouldn't be doing business with, if you will. We don't find any mention to Wuhan. How come?
The composition of the list is by the security and public safety and security services under the auspices of ISED. The Public Health Agency isn't privy to the details of why certain institutions have been placed on that list, but we are in full compliance.
Merci beaucoup. Merci. Je comprends que
Thank you. I understand that the agency made absolutely no mistakes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Villemer. Now we'll go to Dr. Ellis for the next 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. To you, Dr. Polican, around the transfer of Ebola and Henipa virus, would you say that the national security was lax and that science took precedent over national security?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think at the time there was a longstanding effort, I would say, on the part, as demonstrated in West Africa by China deploying over 100 health personnel as an example to help combat.
Dr. Polican, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I didn't ask for a lecture on Ebola. I've had those before. My question today is, national security was lax and science was chosen over national security. Is that not true, sir?
So, Mr. Chair, in this context, the aim of this was to reinforce public health security through the development of medical countermeasures was the stated purpose of the collaboration. And as such, the transfer was authorized.
Thanks very much, Dr. Polican. That being said, We knew that these scientists were under investigation for perhaps 9 months before the transfer occurred. If the transfer did not occur, what would the harm have been?
Well, Mr. Chair, the efforts underway were for the development of medical countermeasures. So, should the several potential candidates for the treatment of Ebola as well as Hennepin have been published since then, it is difficult to ascertain what could have happened, but certainly innovations that have been published in the public domain would likely not have occurred.
Thank you very much. Through you, Chair. Before Dr. Chu's collaboration with the PRC and the Wuhan Institute of Virology, was the Wuhan Institute of Virology a level 4 lab? Simply yes or no.
I'll turn to Dr. Pelican on that.
Are you asking whether the
was the Wuhan Institute a level 4 lab before Dr. Chu's collaboration?
As far as I understand, the WIV was developed as a level 4 facility.
That was not my question, sir. Did Dr. Chu's involvement help the lab get developed, which is now a long-standing level 4 lab?
Mr. Chair, I cannot speak to whether Dr. Chu's involvement was essential to that process.
Thank you for that. Through you, Chair, Dr. Pelican, do you know, did the Government of Canada have an MOU with the PRC or the WIV, the Wuhan Institute, to help its development into a level 4 lab?
I'm not aware of such a MOU, should it exist.
Through you, Chair, Dr. Lucas, do you know of any MOU that may or may not exist?
Mr. Chair, I'm not aware of any.
And Ms. Jeffrey, through you, Chair, same question.
There was no MOU to establish a level 4 lab. There was in 2007 a science and technical cooperation agreement with China to boost collaborative research and development in the life sciences, including for vaccines. That's the only cooperation agreement of which I'm aware.
Thank you very much. We talked a little bit about the affiliated talent programs and scientists having affiliation with them, Ms. Jeffrey. Would you have Canadians believe that these are the only 2 scientists with undeclared affiliation to talent programs with foreign governments?
I can't comment on what undeclared collaborations would be there. I can say that at the agency we have a policy requiring affiliations and a conflict of interest. No such affiliations have been declared, and if they were declared, they would not be accepted.
Thank you very much. Through you, Chair, to Dr. Pelican, we've heard previously, of course, that Ebola and Hennepin were shipped on a flight. I believe it was Air Canada. I might have that incorrect, the exact carrier, and a commercial carrier. Is that a normal procedure? Now, unlike our friend from the NDP, of course, it was not carried on board. We realize that. But is that a usual procedure?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the transfer of level 4 pathogens falls under the transport of dangerous goods regulations, which involves the development of an emergency research response action plan, as well as a number of additional checks. But the ultimate carrier for these types of samples is often commercial.
Thank you, Dr.
Very
Ellis. Mr. Frangistatos, 5 minutes for you.
Thank you, Chair. To Ms. Jeffrey, can you talk a little bit more about the screening processes in place with respect to researchers? How is that particularly different now as a result of this experience?
I would say that there are 2 levels of screening for all personnel who require clearances. There's, of course, the security screening process, which we've already discussed here, including reliability status, including criminal and Canadian Security Intelligence Service checks. There is also a separate Human Pathogens and Toxins Act clearance that's required to work with any sensitive listed materials, which also requires additional training in the use of those pathogens, as well as a separate security clearance that must be granted by the regulator.
Can we go back to the point on security screening? And I understand that you've already shared with us information on that, but I'm thinking about it especially in terms of the wider international context, which to me I think is fundamental in terms of learning from this experience. Does the security screening process have some kind of harmonization, for lack of a better word, with what other countries are doing from a security screening perspective in their labs, or is it something that's quite unique to Canada? Is there some overlap but not entirely overlap? Any comments on that? Because as we've heard at this committee before, this is not an issue that Canada is dealing with on its own. There's other countries, other allies that have, if not the same experience, very similar experiences or challenges that they're preparing for if they haven't already taken place. So I just wonder about this from a wider international context.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think obviously there are different legislative frameworks in different countries, but I think all countries would have in common a security screening and clearance process similar to the one that we have at large. Countries also have specific legislation, but it would differ for each country, similar to our Human Pathogens and Toxins Act. But I'll turn to Dr. CACN, who has been dealing with labs in other countries, to speak to their processes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Indeed, President Jeffrey is correct that I think conceptually, other laboratories in the level 4 space operate in the same way with respect to the need for additional security screening prior to having access to level 3 and level 4 pathogens, particularly security sensitive ones. But the specific mechanics of how that is ascertained is done at the country level.
Left. To both of you, what are the fundamental lessons learned here from an agency perspective? What has been learned, and what will you continue to be focused on to ensure the absolute security of the lab?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've implemented a whole series of security enhancements based on our lessons learned from this process. The different areas of security policy and procedure that I outlined earlier, so that's ranging from cybersecurity to physical security to security clearances, and above all, employee awareness and education and also compliance are all reflections of the lessons we've learned from these issues. I would say, in addition, the much stronger collaboration with our public safety and Canadian Security Intelligence Service colleagues that began during these incidents, immediately before these incidents, that awareness and outreach to the research community that triggered the agency to look into these cases and ultimately led to the termination of these scientists was the initial program of that work. But our global environment and evolving threat picture is such that we have to be closely joined up throughout the research process and throughout our work and the additional work that we have undertaken with public safety and CSIS through the pandemic context and our emergency response protocols are much tighter and closer than before. And the policies and procedures we put in place from an employee and research perspective are designed to provide flags much earlier than I think would have been the case before these incidents occurred.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fragascatos. Back to you, Mr. Villemer, for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. From our conversation earlier, Ms. Jeffrey, you said that nobody was disciplined internally, nobody was held responsible. Is that correct?
I would say that the two employees that are that actually were in violation of the policies have been terminated, and so those were the disciplinary actions that were taken, and those were the only violations of policies and protocols that were at play in these administrative investigations, and they have been
Ouais, je vous remercie, mais c'est évidemment.
Thank you. They're not who I was referring to, obviously. I've been listening to your answers for almost 2 hours. You're saying that there were some incidents, it was nobody's fault, we implemented some policies, it's not that big a deal. However, this entire story led to turn the House of Commons upside down. There are elements that have not yet been revealed, and there was a committee here listening to your answers, and you're acting like there was nothing, and you're giving the impression that nothing happened, which is quite shocking. Yes, if 2 of those scientists were terminated, or their positions were terminated, then there must be a cause. What is the cause?
Very clear that these were very serious security incidents, and they were a violation of the duty of loyalty that all of our scientists strive to uphold every day. We take them very seriously indeed. The protections that are in place to protect national security information and privacy information meant that they could not be fully disclosed in the public domain without appropriate protections, which have been provided by the ad hoc committee and the panel of arbiters. We're very pleased to be here today to discuss them. And I would say that foreign interference, as my Canadian security intelligence colleagues have spoken to in this committee, is a very serious threat, and it's a threat to our scientific research and public health capabilities and our abilities to respond to future threats. And that's the reason why we've put in place so many different measures across the different domains of security and personnel security, as well as cyber and physical security. We take this very seriously, and this duty of care is one that we are now maintaining and enhancing on an ongoing basis. So this is not a static one-time response. We have processes in place to periodically review all of our policies and procedures, to report incidents, to take actions to address them, and I can assure you that we take these duties very, very seriously indeed.
Thank you, Mr. Villeroy. Ms. Idlout, you have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be asking my final questions to the Deputy Minister of Health, Mr. Stephen Lucas, and I'll be asking similar questions that I asked to the Public Health Agency. To you, how often does your department meet with CSIS or other relevant security agencies to improve operational security of Canada's research facilities?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I would indicate is in the first instance, the Chief Security Officer who's with us, Nadine Huggins, supports both Health Canada and the Public Health Agency of Canada through the work of her team. And in that regard, as Madame Jeffrey has noted, there is increased engagement as we have reviewed and strengthened a range of policies pertaining to security in our laboratories, increased engagement with CSIS and public safety and other relevant organizations, including the Communication Security Establishment, in regard to cybersecurity.
I guess my last question would be, what policies have changed over the last 5 years to improve the resilience of departmental activities from foreign interference?
Thank you. What I would note is twofold. In the first instance, as I indicated previously, the laboratories at Health Canada have as a fundamental objective supporting our regulatory system. So the focus is not on research per se, but on laboratory methods for testing products such as pharmaceuticals, developing methodologies for air quality monitoring or testing of contaminants in water. The policies and systems put in place to strengthen research security over the past number of years include strengthening physical security in terms of access and monitoring of research facilities, Secondly, strengthening oversight and systems to protect against cybersecurity threats, which are indeed active. And thirdly, the focus on employee security clearance review, conflict of interest and affiliation declaration, training, and oversight, including policies for laboratory visitors and students, as Madame Jeffrey has spoken to previously. And these have been strengthened further to align with work undertaken in regard to all research institutions in Canada, as expressed by Minister Champagne and Ministers Haidu, Duclos, and most recently Minister Holland, including the policies on research in sensitive areas and named research organizations. Our work and policies are aligned to support the objectives and substance of those guidelines and policies to protect the research security of laboratories in Health Canada.
We're just about at the end. I need one quick question, and this is a very broad-based question, if you don't mind. I mean, the basics of any human-to-human transaction or relationship is usually based on the presumption of honesty, that the person you're dealing with is honest. With this experience that you've had and the necessity to protect such sensitive, materials, etc., and knowledge, has that turned around that we now have a presumption that perhaps somebody is not going to be honest and they have to prove their honesty to us? That's a very broad question, but a brief reflection, if you don't mind, Ms. Jeffrey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Indeed, the clearance process itself requires individuals to declare many details of their past affiliations, lives, and work. We do verify through our security office and our chief security officer those declarations with comparing as for all public servants who have clearances. There are checks done through the RCMP criminally, also through the Canadian Security Intelligence Services to verify, as well as through open and other source public information. Where individuals seek to hide clandestinely other aspects of their intentions, it's very important that we have policies and procedures that are designed to provide sort of tripwires, if you will, to flag areas for further investigation and research, and to ensure that there is oversight and additional layers of approval for events if indeed the previous checks and clearances don't reveal some of those covert intentions. And so what we have done is, in fact, put additional layers that allow us to do additional steps, to have additional sets of eyes looking at approvals, and to make sure that there is multiple keys, if you will, to unlock different processes and approvals, collaborations, and affiliations. So for us, it is about trusting, but also about verifying, and our security services help us to do that. And our policies and procedures in the area of security help us to be continually vigilant. And I think that's what's really required here. It requires continual vigilance, and it requires awareness, and it requires individuals to act and to flag things that they see that might not be quite in line with policies. And that's a culture, and that is the culture that we're building at the Public Health Agency through the processes we put in place since these incidents now over 4 or 5 years ago.
Mr. Chong has asked for just a